The courtroom buzzed with low murmurs as the bailiff called for order. A young man in a gray hoodie sat stiffly at the defendant's table, arms crossed, eyes darting around nervously. His name was Kyle Mercer, and the charge was assault. The incident had gone viral. Surveillance footage showed Kyle shoving an elderly man outside a parking garage after what seemed like a brief verbal exchange. The video ended with the old man crumpled to the pavement, clutching his shoulder. Social media had a field day. Public opinion was already stacked against him. In the gallery sat the victim, Mr. Howard Ellison, 72 years old, retired school teacher, and community volunteer. He had a sling around his left arm and bruising still visible along his jawline. He hadn't said a word since arriving, but his silence carried more weight than any outburst. The judge entered. Everyone stood. Kyle's attorney glanced toward the courtroom doors, checking the time again. There was tension in the air. People assumed the case would be open and shut. That was until the back doors creaked open, and a tall, sharply dressed man in a black suit stepped inside. He walked with calm precision, shoulders square, jaw set, a badge barely visible on his belt. Kyle turned to look. His jaw dropped. "Dad," he whispered. Gasps echoed across the courtroom. The man gave a slow nod to the judge before taking a seat directly behind Mr. Ellison. No one knew yet, but Kyle's world was about to be turned inside out. The courtroom fell into a stunned silence. Everyone's eyes were fixed on the man who had just entered, a man clearly familiar to Kyle, but who no one else recognized. The judge cleared his throat, trying to regain control. "Please be seated," she commanded firmly. Kyle sat back, his mind racing. The man behind Mr. Ellison wasn't just anyone, this was David Mercer, Kyle's father, and an agent with the FBI. A fact no one had expected to see unfold here. David caught Kyle's eye and gave a small nod. Then, turning to the judge, he quietly asked for permission to speak. The judge, curious but cautious, agreed. David stood and addressed the courtroom with a calm authority. "Your Honor, I have information regarding the circumstances that led to this incident. I believe it is crucial to understanding what truly happened." Whispers rippled through the room. Mr. Ellison looked surprised but remained silent. David continued, "My son Kyle is not the aggressor here. There was a provocation, one that has been overlooked by the initial reports." The prosecutor frowned, clearly unprepared for this new turn. "And what proof do you have for this claim?" she challenged. David reached into his briefcase and pulled out a USB drive. "I have additional surveillance footage, witness statements, and evidence that were not considered at the time of arrest." Kyle's attorney leaned forward, hope flickering in his eyes. The courtroom was now on edge, waiting for the judge's decision. The judge tapped her gavel. "This new evidence will be reviewed before proceeding. We will recess until then." As the courtroom emptied, Kyle's gaze locked with his father's, hope and disbelief mixing in his expression. No one saw this coming. But now, everything was different. During the recess, David met privately with Kyle and his attorney in a quiet corner of the courthouse. The tension had eased slightly, replaced by cautious optimism. David plugged the USB into his laptop and played the new footage. The video showed a completely different scene from the original clip. Before Kyle pushed the old man, another younger man had shoved Kyle first, harshly and without provocation. Kyle's shove was clearly defensive, an attempt to protect himself from an unprovoked attack. Alongside the video, David handed over statements from two bystanders who had witnessed the entire exchange. Both confirmed that Kyle was reacting to the aggressive shove by the other man, not the elderly gentleman. Kyle's lawyer shook his head in disbelief. "This changes everything. This shows self-defense, not assault." David nodded. "Exactly. My son was caught in the wrong place at the wrong time. But now, with this evidence, we can prove what really happened." When the court reconvened, the atmosphere had shifted. The judge reviewed the new evidence carefully, then allowed Kyle's defense to present the footage and testimonies. The prosecutor attempted to question the credibility of the new witnesses but found herself struggling against the clear video proof. Mr. Ellison, the old man, watched quietly, his expression unreadable. But when David Mercer approached him after the session, he nodded in appreciation. The courtroom was no longer focused on punishment, it was now about truth. Kyle looked at his father with gratitude. The man who had once been just his dad was now his unexpected champion. Everything had changed because of one man's arrival. The courtroom had shifted from a place of judgment to a place of revelation. The judge, having reviewed the new evidence, called for a brief recess to consider the implications. Outside the courtroom, murmurs of surprise and speculation buzzed among the spectators and press alike. The story that once seemed straightforward was now unraveling into something much more complex. Kyle sat quietly, feeling a mix of relief and anxiety. His father's unexpected entrance and the new evidence had turned the tide, but the battle was far from over. His attorney leaned in and whispered, "This changes everything, but we need to be prepared for the prosecution's response." David Mercer, the FBI agent, remained calm but vigilant. His presence in the courtroom wasn't just a formality, it was a statement. He was there not only as a father but as a protector of truth and justice. He knew the weight his position carried and intended to use it responsibly. When the hearing resumed, the prosecution rose with renewed determination. "Your Honor," the lead attorney began, "while the new footage provides context, we maintain that Mr. Mercer's actions caused harm to Mr. Ellison. We request that the case proceed to trial to fully examine the circumstances." The judge nodded thoughtfully. "Understood. However, given the new information, the charges will be re-evaluated. This court acknowledges the importance of context in cases of physical altercations." Then came a moment that stunned everyone. Mr. Howard Ellison, the elderly man at the center of the case, stood slowly, leaning on his cane. His voice was firm despite his age. "Your Honor, I have spoken with Mr. Mercer and his son. I believe this was a misunderstanding. I do not wish to pursue this further." A hush fell over the courtroom. The judge regarded Mr. Ellison respectfully. "Thank you for your statement. The court will take it under advisement." Kyle felt a wave of emotion crash over him, gratitude, relief, and a deep respect for the man he had once seen only as a victim. David placed a reassuring hand on his son's shoulder. "This isn't just about the law," he said quietly. "It's about understanding, forgiveness, and making sure the truth is heard." The judge then announced that, based on Mr. Ellison's wishes and the new evidence, the assault charge against Kyle Mercer would be dismissed. The courtroom erupted in a mix of applause and murmurs of disbelief. Kyle stood, looking at his father and the old man who had become an unlikely ally. The day that started with a harsh shove and harsh judgment ended with clarity, respect, and a powerful reminder: sometimes justice isn't just about punishment, it's about seeing the whole story. As the courtroom emptied, Kyle whispered to his father, "Thank you for never giving up on me." David smiled, "That's what family does." And with that, a chapter closed, but a new one, built on trust and understanding, was just beginning. The courtroom doors swung open, and people slowly began to leave, still whispering about the surprising turn of events. News crews hurried to catch statements from those involved, but Kyle and his family chose to step aside for a moment of quiet reflection. Outside the courthouse, the summer sun was warm on their faces. Kyle took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the past days lifting from his shoulders. He looked at his father, who stood tall and calm, a stark contrast to the tension and uncertainty that had filled the courtroom just hours before. "I never expected you to show up like that," Kyle said, shaking his head with a smile. "You really saved me." David chuckled softly. "I'm your father. I'm not just going to stand by when you need help." Kyle's phone buzzed with messages, friends, family, even strangers reaching out with words of support. The story had spread, but this time with a message of fairness and truth, not just outrage. Later that evening, Kyle sat down with his father to talk openly for the first time in months. The incident, while stressful, had brought them closer. David shared stories from his work in the FBI about the importance of evidence and perspective, and Kyle opened up about the challenges he faced growing up. For Kyle, this was more than just a legal victory. It was a chance to start fresh, with a better understanding of the power of truth and the value of family standing by your side. Meanwhile, Mr. Ellison, the elderly man, reached out to Kyle personally. He invited him to a community event where they both spoke about conflict resolution and the importance of communication, turning a painful moment into a lesson for others. As the days passed, Kyle became involved in local outreach programs, working to bridge divides and promote peaceful dialogue in his neighborhood. The incident that once threatened to define him became the catalyst for change, not just for Kyle, but for those around him. Sometimes, the hardest moments can lead to the strongest new beginnings. Weeks after the courtroom drama, Kyle found himself standing in front of a community center filled with neighbors, local leaders, and young people eager to listen. His father, David, sat proudly in the front row. Kyle spoke candidly about the incident, the mistake that almost ruined his life, the unexpected support from his father, and the importance of standing up for what is right, even when the odds seem stacked against you. "I want to share something important," Kyle said. "Sometimes, things aren't always what they seem at first glance. It's easy to jump to conclusions, but we owe it to each other to understand the full story before judging." David stepped up next, emphasizing the value of fairness, evidence, and patience, not just in law enforcement, but in everyday life. Their combined message resonated deeply with the crowd. Local organizers invited them to continue participating in workshops and outreach programs aimed at promoting empathy and conflict resolution. Kyle felt a renewed sense of purpose. The painful moments from that day were now guiding him toward helping others avoid similar misunderstandings. He and his father also committed to volunteering together, bridging the gap between law enforcement and the community through honest dialogue. As the event concluded, Kyle looked out at the hopeful faces around him and knew that, despite the hardship, something meaningful had emerged. Sometimes, a single moment can change the course of many lives, not just through what happens, but through what we choose to do next. The challenges they faced in the courtroom had tested Kyle and David's relationship, but ultimately, it forged a stronger bond between father and son. In the weeks following the trial, their communication deepened, and old wounds began to heal. David invited Kyle to visit his FBI office, introducing him to colleagues and showing him the work that had shaped his life. Kyle saw firsthand the dedication and discipline behind the badge, gaining a new appreciation for his father's role. Meanwhile, David learned more about Kyle's world, the pressures he faced, the neighborhood struggles, and the desire to break free from negative cycles. Together, they began planning ways to bridge their different worlds. One weekend, they organized a community event bringing together law enforcement officers and local youth for a day of conversation, sports, and workshops. The event was a success, creating new connections and mutual respect. Through their joint efforts, Kyle found a sense of belonging and purpose that had eluded him before. David, too, rediscovered hope in the future of the community he served. Their story became a symbol of reconciliation, proving that even after conflict, families can come back stronger, and that understanding can bridge even the widest divides. As they walked home one evening, side by side, Kyle smiled and said, "Thanks for fighting for me." David replied, "Always. That's what family does." The past was behind them, and the future was theirs to build. Months after the courtroom drama, the ripple effects of Kyle and David Mercer's story began to be felt throughout the community. What had started as a painful conflict had blossomed into a powerful movement toward understanding, respect, and change. Kyle, once seen as just a defendant in a heated case, was now stepping into a role as a young leader. With his father's support, he launched a local initiative called Bridges of Trust, aimed at fostering dialogue between community members and law enforcement officers. The program organized regular town hall meetings, workshops on conflict resolution, and youth mentorship activities. It wasn't always easy, old wounds and skepticism ran deep, but slowly, people began to show up. They wanted to be part of the change. David dedicated his weekends to volunteering alongside Kyle, sharing insights from his FBI career while listening carefully to the community's concerns. His presence brought credibility, but more importantly, it showed that those in authority could listen, learn, and grow. At one particularly emotional meeting, a young woman stood up and shared her story of feeling misunderstood and judged by police officers in her neighborhood. Her words struck a chord with everyone in the room, including law enforcement officers who promised to work harder to build trust. Kyle spoke afterward, his voice steady but heartfelt. "We all want safety, respect, and a chance to be heard. This is how we start, by listening and by caring." The local news picked up the story, highlighting the unlikely partnership between a former defendant and his FBI father as a beacon of hope in a community too often divided by fear and misunderstanding. Even Mr. Howard Ellison, the elderly man from the original incident, became a supporter, volunteering his time to speak about forgiveness and second chances. The community began to change, not overnight, but through steady, determined steps. Kyle and David understood that true justice isn't just about court rulings. It's about healing, rebuilding, and creating spaces where everyone feels seen and respected. As they stood together at a community picnic months later, watching children play and neighbors share stories, Kyle felt a profound sense of hope. They had taken something painful and turned it into a powerful force for good. And that was just the beginning. The momentum built by Kyle and David Mercer's efforts didn't fade, it grew stronger with each passing month. The Bridges of Trust initiative expanded its reach beyond the initial neighborhood, drawing interest from nearby communities facing similar challenges. Local officials began taking notice, inviting Kyle and David to speak at city council meetings and public forums. Their message was clear: meaningful change requires honesty, accountability, and most of all, empathy. Kyle's journey, from a young man on trial to a community advocate, became an inspiring story featured on local radio and news programs. His willingness to own his mistakes and his commitment to helping others resonated widely. David, too, found new purpose beyond his official duties. He began working with his FBI colleagues to develop community outreach strategies, aiming to build bridges rather than barriers. One evening, at a regional conference on community policing, David shared their story, emphasizing how family, understanding, and truth can transform even the most difficult situations. Meanwhile, Kyle started a mentorship program focused on youth empowerment, steering young people away from conflict and towards opportunities. With David's help, he secured partnerships with schools, nonprofits, and local businesses. The man who had once been seen as a defendant was now a role model, proof that circumstances don't define a person, actions do. At home, the Mercer family grew closer. Shared experiences had healed old wounds and forged a bond stronger than ever. Mr. Ellison, the elderly man at the heart of the incident, continued to support the efforts, often speaking at events about compassion and the power of forgiveness. The courtroom incident that once seemed destined to tear lives apart had instead sparked a movement, a testament to resilience, understanding, and the possibility of redemption. As Kyle stood on stage during a community award ceremony, receiving recognition for his work, he glanced toward his father in the audience. Their eyes met, and a silent promise passed between them, to keep pushing forward, no matter the obstacles. The journey wasn't over, but one thing was certain: together, they had changed their world for the better. The years following the courtroom incident marked the beginning of a profound transformation, not just for Kyle Mercer and his father, David, but for the entire community they served. Bridges of Trust evolved from a small local initiative into a widely recognized program, adopted by cities across the region. Its principles of empathy, dialogue, and mutual respect became the foundation for new approaches to community engagement and policing. Kyle continued to grow into a confident leader, pursuing studies in social work and community development. His past, once a source of shame, became a powerful tool to inspire others facing adversity. David, now a senior agent and respected mentor within the FBI, worked tirelessly to integrate community-focused practices into law enforcement training programs nationwide. His experience on the front line and the personal story with his son added weight to his advocacy. Together, father and son co-authored a book titled, Beyond the Badge, Bridging Divides Through Understanding, which became a bestseller among those interested in social justice and community reform. They traveled extensively, speaking at conferences, schools, and law enforcement academies, sharing their journey and encouraging others to listen before judging. In their hometown, a community center was named in honor of the Mercer family's efforts, a place where young people could find support, guidance, and a safe space to grow. Mr. Howard Ellison, whose kindness and willingness to forgive had helped spark the healing, attended the center's grand opening, surrounded by neighbors and friends. Reflecting on the journey, Kyle often thought about how a single moment, the shove, the courtroom, his father's unexpected arrival, had set them all on this path. What had begun as a painful confrontation turned into a legacy of change, proof that even the darkest moments can lead to light when met with courage, truth, and compassion. Their story was a testament to the power of family, the importance of justice, and the enduring hope that communities can heal and grow stronger together. As Kyle and David stood side by side at the community center's podium, ready to speak to the next generation, they knew one thing for sure: their work was far from over, but the future was bright. Because sometimes, the greatest victories come not from conflict, but from the courage to change. Years after that tense courtroom day, Kyle Mercer stood before a crowd gathered at the very courthouse where his life had nearly been derailed. But today was different. Today was a celebration, not of a trial, but of transformation. Beside him stood his father, David, proud and steady as ever. Together, they recounted the journey from accusation to advocacy, from misunderstanding to unity. Kyle spoke first, his voice clear and confident. That day could have defined me in the worst way. But thanks to truth, family, and the willingness of a community to listen, it became the turning point in my life. David nodded, adding, "Justice isn't just about laws and courts, it's about people, understanding, and second chances." The crowd applauded, many with tears in their eyes. Among them was Mr. Howard Ellison, who had long since become a friend and partner in their community efforts. The Bridges of Trust program had grown beyond anyone's expectations, transforming neighborhoods, changing lives, and inspiring hope. As the event closed, Kyle looked at his father with gratitude. The man who had once quietly entered the courtroom to change his fate had now helped change the fate of many. Their story was a testament to resilience, compassion, and the power of standing together. And as they walked away from the courthouse, side by side, Kyle knew this was only the beginning of a legacy built on courage and love. Because sometimes, the hardest battles lead to the greatest victories.